Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Open Source Workplace Weekly Video Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Steve Todd. I'm the Global Head of Workplace at NASDAQ, and I'm also the founder of Open Source Workplace. Open Source Workplace is a community for workplace professionals to come and share information and knowledge. And go over to opensourceworkplace.com to find out a little bit more. So, what do we do in these weekly video podcasts? We actually talk to industry leaders, industry experts to really get their pulse on what is going on in the marketplace today and what are the key trends and what are the things that they're looking at. And today's no different. I'm going to cut over to our agenda for today. Today we're going to talk about I hate Mondays on Fridays. So what does that mean? Many things are talked about today about the workplace, what's going to be in the future, the hybrid work model, but what does that really look like and how are people going to react to that? And today our guest is Andrew Mawson. He's the owner of Advanced Workplace Associates. He sent through to me a document yesterday that he's going to be publishing today, and we'll put a link down in the description below a little bit later. But we're looking at team work models. He has four models that AWA believe that people are going to work in going forward. What does that mean for office attendance post-COVID? Activity-based working and dynamic scheduling. What is that? How does that impact how office space is going to be used? And then also, the following on from that, what is the impact to the environment of getting this right or getting this wrong? So we're going to dig into that. So, but before we do, let's welcome in Andrew. Andrew, how you doing, sir?
Hi, Steve. Yeah, good. Thank you. Nice to be here and chatting through this really exciting subject. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, thank you, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you. You've been one of the persons that I go to regularly, where we have a chat about all these things going on. We've been discussing about this topic for a bit of time. How do we actually get to a hybrid workplace? I think there's a lot of consensus that that's probably going to be the work model that we go through, but there's a lot of
Mm.
nuances to that. It's going to be different between different countries, different industries, and how do we sort of get around that profile? And I think the other thing that sort of comes through is flexibility, right? Flexibility from an employee and employer perspective. We could argue if there's a different in perspective of how much flexibility an employer will give as to what an employee wants. And just kicking that off. I mean, what do you think is sort of like, what do you think there's the differences between the flexibility an employer
Mm.
wants to provide and employee perhaps wants?
Well, I mean, I see in a lot of companies we're working with and talking to quite a bit of tension around this actually, because I don't think there's any argument. People are looking for a greater level of flexibility in when and where they work. I mean, there can be no, anybody around the planet cannot be, hidden from that reality. Every survey that we've been doing, every study that's been done, everything that's been in the public domain is saying the same thing, and it's been saying that for quite a long time, Steve. I mean, this is not new news for us. We've known for quite a long time through the studies that we do that increasing numbers of people want the ability to work at different locations and different times. So that side of the equation is, almost unarguable. The comfort that organizations have in allowing that is probably one of the more difficult things. And even inside companies, there are different people who have different views about this. I mean, I think we shouldn't underestimate the sort of glue, I think, that exists within organizations to simply go back to the old world, because it was safe. A lot of companies, did okay during that period. A lot of leaders, particularly those ones in power, know how to operate in that world. And managing a community of people who are not always around within your eye shot requires a new set of understandings and a new set of skills. So a lot of senior leaders who are fairly ingrained in the way they look at the world simply either can't see the need to do that, or they just don't want to. And so the power in organizations is often in the hands of people who might not necessarily wish to embrace this brave new world, which would be a terrible shame, because I think there are so many things that we've learned over the last 9, 12 months about what the possibilities are, that it would be a shame if organizations weren't able to embrace these new things and make the most of them. So yeah, that tension is definitely there.
And whenever you mean, obviously you provide guidance to a lot of organizations, senior leaders.
Mm.
what is some of the sort of key things that you think that they're trying to get their minds around? What is the comfort that you're trying to get them from and to, right? Because that's the journey, right?
Well, I mean, you know, I wish there was one answer to that
Yeah.
question. You know, it's all down to individuals. You know, individuals have different levels of um, comfort with these ideas, different vantage points, different wins and losses in the game. I mean, I think fundamentally, though, I think what we're trying to do is encourage people to and organisations to look at the idea of making everybody capable of operating in a virtual world. That doesn't mean to say that we want everybody to work at home, but what it means is if we can give everybody the competence, comfort, confidence, and skills and technology to be able to operate anywhere, and for leaders to be able to work with teams and lead teams to work anywhere, then it gives us a lot of opportunities. I mean, it means when we've got to that point, you know, we're all working the same way. We aren't dominated by some notion that the office is the only place to go and that, you know, there's a bunch of people who go there and everybody else are weird. You know, we actually move our policies and practices and everything to the point where they recognize the ability for people to work anywhere. And in doing so, we then have the freedom to be able to use space and buildings as we believe is necessary to add value. And I mean, I think one of the most intriguing things that we've seen during this sector is some organizations are doing remarkably well without offices at all. I mean, I know a number of companies in the insurance sector, for instance, that are, you know, having great years. I mean, they're absolutely great years, and their profitability is fantastic. Their business travel has dropped like a stone. You know, their offices are empty, so they're not cooling them or lighting them. You know, I mean, it's you know, it's becoming pretty difficult to justify having offices where people attend every day notionally. It just is becoming very difficult in some industries to justify that, and unless there is real value associated with it. I mean, it's interesting. We also do quite a lot of work in the professional services sector, where you know there is actually, you know, in the work that people are doing, some of it is very, you know, focused and researchy and but some of it is very complex where you need people together. So there you can see there is a need to bring people to a central location to work on the really tough stuff. Also, you know, to try and help more junior people become more kind of connected to the organization, although, you know, arguably there are better ways to do that as well. So I think the people are going to start looking at buildings from the standpoint of what does bringing people together in one location do for us in real value terms, as opposed to just assuming that, you know, we're in business, so we need a building and everybody needs to come. And I think that's really where the default is now switched to. And you know, I think a lot of companies, the default will move to we work away. We have the right. We give people the right to work wherever they want to. We train them, we guide them, whatever, and we bring them together when we need to. So you flip the default position. Now, I get that that is an uncomfortable position for some leaders. I also get that it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people in the world of real estate, architecture, design, and so on, whose businesses are wedded to the idea that companies need space, and the more they have, the more those companies will be successful. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the lens through which some of those companies see the world and express themselves is underpinned by that as a notion. But I'm afraid that the, the general movement is not about presenteeism. The general movement is about virtuality and using physical assets like buildings, which, let's face it, are very expensive, generate lots of carbon, and are largely underutilized, even in the old world. Um, you know, we want to be thinking about those in a different way, and I think it's a great time to do that.
Yeah, and there's a few threads I'd love to pull on, but I do want to go into like some of the working models that you've identified.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
different team models, and we talk about a hybrid
mm,
work, but actually you've
mm,
identified four elements to that,
Mm,
what team structures could be. Could you walk
sure.
us through some of your thinking there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think universally everybody's talking about a sort of a hybrid world where, we're in the office 2 to 3 days a week. Well, I think that might work out to be the average, right? But it's this talking of averages hides a multitude of different options. And I think what we see is that, there are probably four dominant models that will have to coexist. And these are at a team level. So you may find a team, for instance, in the old world came to the office every day, but actually have learned over the last 12 months how to work very well together. They've got a very supportive leader. The work that they do supports them working away. And those guys, I think, are going to continue to work at home, and they will maybe come into the office once in a, a while to see a client or a partner or do something that's tricky. And it might even be that in that team, say a team of 10, it might be that one or two people, decide that they do need to come in to the office every day because they don't actually have the home facilities to enable them to work in an effective way. But the predominant sort of ethos around the team will be we work away and we come in once in a while. So that's kind of one model. The second model is pretty much the same. The only difference is that the team recognize that they really do want to be together every so often, possibly to deal with tricky things, to fuse their knowledge, or just from a social standpoint. So we might see teams saying, well, look, we can work away and we just all want to be in the office 1 day a week, or we want to be in the office, the second Tuesday of every month or something. And I think we're seeing that model in the IT industry, I think, quite a lot with programmers and people like that. So that's kind of the second model. The third model moves across more to the office, which is where we go back to a kind of a sort of office centricity, where possibly the heart of the team is in the office every day, but there's a recognition, maybe begrudgingly, that people want to have some more flexibility and they can work away and they can do all the things they do. And then there's the fourth group, which is really where we're talking about the office being the place where people go every day, and they go there every day because maybe there's a belief that there's sort of always on serendipity has huge value, or it may well be that there's a regulatory situation that that demands it, kind of thing. So those are the four scenarios, and we think that one of the things that teams should be doing in the coming weeks is thinking about and talking about which one of those models that they go for. Now, looking at that from a space standpoint, I mean, all these are going to coexist. So companies won't be dominated by one or the other, in my mind. And so, as a consequence of that, what you're going to find is that if you operate your buildings in a traditional model, you're going to have maybe a team that's office based next to a team that's office centric, next to a team that's a home hybrid, next to a team that's home centric. You're going to find very quickly that your buildings are empty because
And
if you
before,
allocate space,
yeah,
yeah,
I don't mean to cut you off, but I know we're going to get to that. I have some questions on this though, Andrew.
sure,
In
sure,
essence,
sure.
as somebody who runs workplace and who really wants to understand who falls into these categories,
Mm.
what do you think is the best way to get to the root to understand what this is? Is this a survey to employees? Is this a survey with leadership, or how do you get to that?
Well, what we've been doing over the last 9 months, Steve, is looking at this through four different views, but the two that are most important in this context are, first a survey which drills down into the real experiences and intentions of people post COVID, and then the second is an analysis of each role, really, to establish the truth about what it really needs, whether it really needs, from a business perspective, some level of central, uh, you know, coming together, as it were.
Hmm.
But I mean, I think so. So that's how we've been doing it from an analytical standpoint. But I actually think, as we nudge forward now, as we start to see the lights come on again in the world generally, that actually leaders should be having conversations with their teams, quite open conversations with teams as to how they want to work in the future, and which of these four models appears to be most appropriate to them at a particular time. And of course, you've got to take into account the needs of the business and the needs of the individuals, and it's going to require some, some skill in having those conversations. But it seems to me that's probably the way forward. Really,
Yeah.
that's how we would do it.
Yeah, and sort of, I know I cut you off, so I do want to go because obviously we take this, we
Okay.
overlay it into a building, and you put together a very nice graphic that basically represents all those elements that you
Mm,
talk about the different teams and then what that means for the
mm,
office. And this is like
mm.
visually, I think most people attest this is what we kind of expect attendance to be.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah,
What do you
yeah,
think?
I think so. I mean, this. I mean, we've oversimplified this,
Right.
just for effect. But I mean, if you take the ground floor here in this picture, what we've got is, a traditional model of working where on a Monday and a Friday, occupancy is relatively low, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's reasonably high. But even in the old world, when occupancy was high, the space was only occupied 60% of the time.
Right.
As you move up, you sort of see on the next floor, we've just put office centric, uh, and again, you're going to see the same kind of patterns, but at a lower level of intensity because some of the people are going to be working away more. But as you go further, if you take the home hybrid model, which is the one where people come in 1 day a week, well, you're going to see, say, a Wednesday or a Tuesday or a Thursday or whatever. That's going to be probably the chosen day for them to come in, and that's fine. And the rest of the time, it's going to be pretty underused. And then the top floor is showing what happens with the home center, really a trickle. So this is, like, as I say, this is oversimplistic, but I mean, what you can see from this is that if people have more flexibility, they're likely to choose Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as their days in the office, making Mondays and Fridays, even worse utilized than they were before,
Yeah.
unless we manage it, kind of thing. And if you imagine, instead of thinking about it simplistically like this, if you imagine a building in which different teams with these different styles and everything are next to each other within floors and stuff, well, you're going to see like a sort of a Swiss cheese effect. And I just don't think that's a great thing from the standpoint of buzz and energy, and certainly not a great idea from a space utilization or a carbon perspective. So that I think is, if we don't actually manage this, that's, I think, what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think while you say it's simplistic, I think it does illustrate, that there is risk that there will be, neighborhoods of islands, right, where individuals are sitting, they're coming in those days, they're sitting there by themselves, and then it's kind of like,
Mm,
well, why do I bother if I'm sitting here by myself? But one of the other things that's sort of gone through my head, I'm curious to know what you're seeing in your research. Do you
mm.
think the travel distance that an employee has to make to an office will greatly impact how often they come to the office, irrespective of sort of what sort of category they would fall into, typically, or for their
Yeah,
team?
yeah, I do think that, Steve. I mean, I think it's interesting. I don't know whether you're seeing this in New York. I think you probably are, actually. But what we're seeing here is a bit of a property boom in locations around, London, where people have sort of decided that, there is no reason why they need to live so close to the center, and they're cashing in their chips, and they're moving out to places that are maybe an hour and a half commute into the office, or even further, in the knowledge that they will be able to come into the office maybe once or twice a week in the future. Or the other thing that I don't think anybody's talking about right now is the business of what I guess we would call time slicing. So the idea that you do some of your work, before you come in the morning. So you maybe, put your commute off till about 10 o'clock or something, and you work at home. You do all the things you can do diligently there, and then you come into the office and you do all the things that are most valuable there. And again, avoiding the commute, avoiding the peaks. And maybe we're looking at a world where we can actually smooth out some of the travel peaks as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that's. that world is for sure here. I mean, and as the days go by, and as technology becomes more and more powerful and cheap and economically available, I can't see any reason why that trend would shift. You know.
No, I agree. And as someone who did travel and does travel, I totally am in line with you in a sense that I look at sort of my early mornings and how much work I get through. And if I had the ability or flexibility to go in that little bit later, and I typically do, I work from home pre-COVID, a couple of days a week. So I did fall into that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday where I went into the office, and that's when our team was in most of the time as well. So I can sort of see this. Now, obviously, we lay this out, we look at it from a floor plan, and we look from an occupancy perspective. There's a lot of underutilized space. So
Mm,
you have taken it forward and you have put it through a suggestion of a
mm.
way to address some of this, where obviously we're able to reduce the actual footprint that needs to be occupied. And you sort of, what you're proposing is the use of activity based working and dynamic scheduling. So let's first off start with this for those who may not be fully aware of what activity based working is, Andrew. What is that?
Sure. Well, like activity-based work. I mean, in a day's work, a lot of people do very different things. And what activity-based working is just a recognition of that. And the idea is basically that we create a range of different sorts of space around a floor plan. Um, and what we're able to do is design those different spaces on the basis of the needs of the occupants that are in there. In an ideal world, of course, we make that quite flexible so we can change it depending on the nature of how the occupying teams are working. But that's the idea, and the idea is that people are mobile within the workplace, and they go and work in different parts of the floor to do different things, so optimizing their ability to be effective. And this idea is often gets very confused, because people say, "Oh, that's hot desking." Well, it's not hot desking. Hot desking is a rather nasty application of open plan free address working, which doesn't recognise that people, are in need of these different things. This is about taking advantage of the mobility that technology gives us, but giving people all of the things they need in a day's work to be the best they can be. So it necessarily means that there is a sort of departure from the notion of ownership for some people. And that, I think, has been one of the challenges, certainly in certain parts of the world. This this linkage about, between the individual's personal persona and how they're viewed by the world, and the physical artifacts that are granted to them in the organization. In some organizations, that's, you know, there's a kind of there's a linkage. So people will say, well, if I don't own my own desk or I don't own my own office, what will people think of me?
Mm,
And what will I think of myself? Will my my feeling is that I'm no longer the person I was. I'm sort of devoid of some of the things that made me who I think I am, and that's one of the biggest challenges with this transition, particularly for particularly for senior leaders. But the idea makes huge amounts of sense because it gives people what they need, but also it enables us to use space in a much more efficient way.
mm,
In the old world, most buildings, most desks in most buildings were only really occupied sort of 55% of the time that they were available. And they were only available, let's face it, 5 days a week and between probably 8 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock in the evening. So from an asset utilization standpoint, really poor.
mm.
So, I think there's ways we can make this whole thing work a lot better, but we have to kind of throw away some of our old models of the world. And that, of course, is the tricky bit, and why people need support with change, really,
Yeah.
Steve.
No, no, absolutely. And the second element of this, you talk about dynamic scheduling. What is
Mm.
that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because in this new world, we see the likely demand profile for space being very different each day. I mean, you can sort of see from the previous model that we talked about, you know, there are going to be different teams in on different days. And in an ideal world, what you want to be able to do is to consolidate all of that occupancy into a couple of floors. So instead of having, the picture at the top of the screen here where you've got a number of different floors that really are very poorly occupied. What you want to be doing is managing your occupancy so that actually you consolidate that on, say, 2 floors. And the way that you do that, I think, is, there are some practical ways you can do it. Mondays and Fridays, you need to be thinking about, well, can we make those anchor days for particular teams? Do we do things on those Mondays and Fridays that act as a kind of magnet for people? Celebrity chefs, free drinks, whatever it is, that just make it more palatable to come in on a Monday or Friday. But the other thing I think that's really interesting is the notion of dynamic scheduling. And the idea here is that through an app, basically what you're able to do is to articulate your needs. So I don't mean that you book. I mean you say on Monday or on Wednesday I'm going to want to be in, and in order to be in and be effective, I'm going to want to be close to a meeting room or close to this person or that person. And basically, what the system does, of course, hundreds or thousands of people could be doing this same thing and putting their needs in for the week. And what the system does, it basically says, well, you're Steve Todd. Steve Todd needs usually to be close to, his his co-working friends. And so we'll all put them together. And that group always needs to be close to a particular set of meeting rooms or close to a particular other department. So what it does every night, it looks at the demand profile and it looks at the supply. And using artificial intelligence, it basically, does a rejig every night. And when you turn up in the morning, you look at a big screen or you look at your app and it says, well, yeah, Andrew Mawson. Yeah, you're on the third floor, in the on the left wing, and you go up there and you find that you have all pretty much the things you need. Your colleagues are there. You people you need to interact with are there. And you might go in the following day, and because the profile has changed completely, you might find yourself on the first floor, on the west wing. But again, what the system is trying to do is to get you all the things you need in order to be effective. But in the process, what it helps us to do is optimize the use of the space and possibly even close down certain floors so that we're not generating
Mm.
carbon, we're not cooling those floors, and we're not lighting them. So I think using technology to do this, and if you push that even further and you start using sensors, within the space, well, you will know what the temperature is at each desk and the humidity level and the noise level and all this. And if you poll people after their experience, you can find out how good it was.
Mm-hmm.
So you always know that Steve Todd requires a temperature of, seems to be happy with a temperature of such and such, and he always requires to be in a space that has a bit of buzz about it. So you can begin to build up quite an intelligent picture about Steve Todd's needs, and you can start factoring those into the overall mix when your system is doing its calculations every night. And so I think it sounds a bit far fetched to some people, this idea, but I think increasingly, as once we start to you know sort of part company with the past, I see no reason why this sort of idea couldn't work. Um, and
Yeah, and I
and I
have
think
to, I have to
good for everybody, really.
Yeah, no, I have to confess the work that the workplace analytical tools and software development tools, that sort of the acceleration of that over the last 12 months has been tremendous.
Mm,
With the innovation, how they're operating, the way they're looking and building a lot of this functionality. A lot of it's in its infancy, but you see the
yeah,
direction where it's going and what the capabilities are going to be in another 6 to 12 months. Is going to be phenomenal, and I have to take a hat off to a lot of those organizations. They've done tremendously well. And obviously, we look at this and we talked about the emissions, and we can sort of come to that because there is obviously a huge opportunity here.
mm,
um, but I think we have to stress as well, Andrew, that this isn't just a workplace or workplace design or a real estate, rejig or redesign or new furniture going in, right? This is a whole process. It's the way an organization is structured, how it works, how it connects with each other. And there are a lot of
sure,
further elements that, while we're depicting a very simplistic structure here, you've told me about it's not easy, it's not straightforward, and it's complex. So we have to sort of mention that. And to your point, whenever we look at the floor plans, the two floor plans that are now empty, or two floors that are empty. That's the opportunity that we can sort of contribute to the environment, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think going forward environmentally, there are lots of things actually, we don't fully recognize in terms of work in the workplace and the contribution it makes. I mean, offices are big generators of carbon, no argument. Commuting is another big source of carbon. Um, Business travel is massive actually, and I think in the new world, all of these things we should be thinking about them very carefully. I mean, I know, I mentioned a couple of companies I know that have been doing exceptionally well. Well, one of the reasons why they've been doing exceptionally well is they're not spending any money on transatlantic, flights.
Hmm.
Yet they're still being able to operate effectively. Now, I'm not somebody who thinks that we don't need physical color, we don't need to travel, and I don't buy that at all. But I think what we've learned is we can manage with a lot less of it, and I think that's what we have to do as we go forward. That's what companies should be doing as they go forward, is thinking, how can they learn from this? How can they draw a line in the sand in terms of the old world and start looking at the evolution to
Mm.
the kind of models that we are talking about, because this isn't going away, Steve. I mean, if you and I will be sitting here in 10 years time and looking back at how people operated, in just after the sort of 2010 to 20, and we'll chuckle about it. We'll go, oh, that was ridiculous doing all that. I really think this is a time for change.
It is. So you think about those companies that are doing successfully well. Do you think if they adopted this model that you're talking about, where there is this four segments of their organization, and if they get that right, there is the ability to either enhance and go further than they did in this work environment where everyone's working at home? Do you think that's the real opportunity ahead for those
Well, oh,
companies?
I think so. I mean, I think because I think we did, we have lost some things during this period. We've learned a lot and we've lost some things. And the opportunity now is for us to, to reflect intelligently on both of those worlds and to put them together to create something which is better than the old, and enables us to be very effective going forward. Um, no, I mean, I think this is exactly the time to be doing that. And I think some companies, I mean, some companies are being quite strident and making changes right now and being very forceful about it, which is fine. But other companies are saying, well, not sure. All these surveys, they were done during a time of tension, and will people really work this way when we come out of all this, or will this be just, we'll snap back into it. So some companies are being actually quite cautious, and wanting to wait and see what happens when we move back. And I think that's okay. But the advice I would give them is make sure you have invested in technology that allows you to understand what's going on, because you will need you will need the evidence, as you move. If you eventually do move, you'll need that evidence. The danger I think that companies have, if they're not careful, is that they just instantly slip back, and then trying to make that further shift becomes much more difficult. This is a time for change. People understand that the world is changing. Now is the time to make change if you're going to make it. But there are plenty of reasons why senior leaders will put up, for not doing it.
Hmm.
And you know those who want to bring about change in organizations need to act now, I think. Like I say, this is almost like an inevitability. This isn't, this whatever goes on at this point, is only a temporary. This is like water; it's finding its way, and this whole movement towards the environment, and more interested in human performance, well-being, all these things. They're not going away, and companies that just sort of shrug their shoulders and carry on and hope it's all going to go away. It's not going to go. It's a long-term trend, I think.
No, I suspect you're right, and I think you're right, and I agree with you in the patience in making decisions, rushing into things, collecting data. Make that investment today, not necessarily making the investment to reach, redesign all your offices. It's like let's do it in a very analytical way, and information database way. So I think that's the key. I think there are all elements that. We'll wait and see what happens. I'm really curious to see how things transpire. I think it's going to be a fascinating study, and I'm sure you and AWA will continue to watch, observe, and sort of provide us with updates and guidance on that. So, Andrew, any
Yeah.
final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Well, we covered a lot of ground
Yeah,
today. So, I mean, my only final thought really is, this is a time of change, and anybody who has a change agenda, needs to be thinking about how they can, draw those who have a consistent, motivation uh, to do that. And because there are, organizations are a huge mix of people, some who want to bring about change, some who absolutely don't want change, and some people who will, if given the right opportunities and the right arguments, will change. And, it's a question of, liberating those people who have that desire, I think. And now is a good time to be doing that.
great, great. Thank you, Andrew. And we'll put links to obviously the study that you have provided, and also I've put links where people can connect with you, Andrew, and AWA. So look, thank you as always. It's always a pleasure chatting with
Pleasure.
you. It's always great digging into your mind and understanding and pulling out what you're learning. So I thank you for your time today, mate.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.